It all began at a tech expo unlike any other, held in downtown Los Angeles, an annual celebration of innovation where titans of industry mingled with students, dreamers, and budding inventors. The air buzzed with anticipation as Elon Musk stepped on stage. People had come to hear about the future of artificial intelligence, Mars colonization, and neural implants. No one expected what would steal the show, a single question from a child that would stop Musk in his tracks. The room was packed, cameras flashing, 1,000 devices recording every second. Elon, clad in his usual understated blazer, had just concluded a thought-provoking presentation on sustainable energy. The audience, captivated and inspired, leaned forward as the moderator opened the floor for questions. The usual suspects rose: scientists asking about quantum propulsion, investors inquiring about new Tesla models, and engineers itching to pick his brain. But then a small voice pierced the room. From the back, a boy no older than 10 stood up, his hand timidly raised. He wore a faded hoodie and sneakers that had seen better days, clearly not from the wealthy elite that made up most of the audience. The microphone was handed to him, and a hush fell over the room, not because of who he was, but because of what he said. He didn't ask about rockets. He didn't ask about stocks. Instead, with innocent sincerity and piercing clarity, he asked Elon Musk what he believed about God. For a moment, the silence was deafening. The boy's eyes didn't waver, and his tone wasn't confrontational. It wasn't a test or a stunt. It was curiosity, pure, childlike curiosity. The kind that doesn't come from cynicism or debate, but from a deep yearning to understand the world. The kind of question adults rarely ask aloud, especially not to someone like Musk. Elon blinked. For a man known for his rapid-fire thinking and fast responses, he seemed human, vulnerable, unprepared. The question didn't just catch him off guard, it unraveled something deeper. The crowd began to murmur. Some chuckled nervously. Others shifted in their seats. A few even glanced toward the moderators, expecting them to skip over it. But Elon held up a hand. He wanted to answer, yet he didn't, not immediately. Instead, he asked for the boy's name. It was Nathan, a foster child who had won a local robotics competition and was granted a scholarship ticket to attend the event. He had waited patiently all afternoon, clutching that one question like a treasure he couldn't let go of. Elon's eyes softened when he heard this. Then he invited the boy onto the stage. The crowd wasn't sure what to make of it. This was new, even for Elon. But there was something profound in the way he walked to the edge of the stage and offered Nathan a hand. As the boy stood beside him, a strange shift took place in the room. The focus turned inward, not toward gadgets or algorithms, but toward something more ancient. A quiet truth settled into the air. Technology could send us to the stars, but the questions of the soul still lingered on Earth. Elon began slowly. His words were measured, his tone unlike anything his followers had heard before. He didn't dive into science or dismiss the question with a vague statement about the universe. Instead, he asked Nathan why he wanted to know. And Nathan's answer? Because his little sister had died last month, and he wanted to believe she was somewhere better. The moment cracked the air like glass. Even the most skeptical in the crowd leaned forward, caught in the raw gravity of the boy's grief. Nathan didn't cry. He wasn't seeking pity. He just wanted someone, anyone, to tell him it wasn't all meaningless. Elon stood motionless. He stared at the boy, and something in his expression changed. Not the sharp wit of a CEO, not the cold logic of an inventor, but the gaze of a man who had known loss too. And in that quiet space, a floodgate opened, not of data or projections, but of memory. Elon Musk, one of the world's most brilliant minds, was suddenly brought back to the darkest corners of his own childhood. To a time in South Africa when he too asked questions no one could answer. when violence, loneliness, and confusion filled his days, and the idea of a higher power seemed both distant and necessary. And that was when he said something that made even the most jaded in the audience stop breathing. He began to speak not as a billionaire, but as a boy who had once needed faith more than science. The room no longer felt like a tech summit. It was more like a church now, a place of reverence, of hushed awe. Elon Musk stood before the crowd with young Nathan at his side, and for once, the spotlight wasn't about numbers, innovation, or the next frontier. It was about the search for meaning. Elon looked down at Nathan, then out across the sea of faces before him. It was as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, torn between the role the world had assigned him and the truth he had kept buried. For decades. He finally broke the silence with a voice softer than anyone expected. He spoke of his childhood, not the brilliant young student fascinated by engineering, but the lonely boy who used books as an escape from a home that felt cold and unpredictable. He described moments of hiding under tables while adults screamed above him, of nights staring at the stars through a cracked window, wondering if someone out there could hear him. He had asked the same question Nathan asked now. Is there a God? Not in church, not in school, but alone, so utterly alone that he would sometimes whisper to the ceiling just in case someone or something might listen. And for the first time publicly, he admitted something startling. He had hoped there was a God, not because science demanded it, but because his heart did. The crowd leaned in, many stunned to hear this side of him. Elon Musk had long been portrayed as a cold rationalist, someone obsessed with data and dismissive of the spiritual. But this was a man peeling away the layers in real time. He didn't claim to know the truth. He didn't wave a flag for religion or declare allegiance to any doctrine. Instead, he said he understood what it meant to want there to be something more. Because at the end of a day filled with blueprints and algorithms, there were still moments when the silence of the universe felt louder than any launch countdown. He looked back at Nathan and told him gently that sometimes the smartest minds don't have the answers, and sometimes that's okay, because the real question isn't whether God exists out there, but what you choose to believe when no one else is watching. Nathan listened carefully, his small hands clutching the edge of the podium. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he wasn't just hearing words, he was feeling understood. Truly, deeply understood. That alone brought more comfort than any complicated explanation ever could. Then Elon turned back to the crowd and asked a question of his own. What if belief wasn't just about theology? What if it was also about the belief we place in each other? In the strength of a young boy to face loss, in the courage to ask impossible questions, in the quiet idea that hope, in all its forms, might be the most powerful force in the universe. People weren't just listening, they were transformed. Tears began to stream down cheeks. Journalists forgot to type. Scientists who had never pondered faith found themselves swept into an emotional tide. What was happening on that stage wasn't a lecture. It was a moment that would ripple far beyond the walls of that convention center. And then, just as the emotions settled into a thick stillness, Elon said something unexpected. He admitted he had once had a dream, a recurring one in fact, that haunted him during his darkest years. In it, he was a child again, floating through space, weightless, watching planets spin silently beneath him. And in that dream, just before waking, he always heard the same voice, soft but firm, say, "You're not alone." He never told anyone about it. Not his ex-wives, not his closest friends. But in that moment, with Nathan by his side, it felt right to share. The room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. The power wasn't in clapping. It was in the collective realization that even the most brilliant minds carry questions that keep them up at night. And maybe, just maybe, admitting those questions was more powerful than having all the answers. As the moderator gently stepped in to shift the event back to schedule, Elon made one last request. He asked to speak with Nathan privately after the event. The boy nodded, and the two stepped off the stage together, leaving behind an audience stunned into silence. What happened in that private meeting would become the stuff of legend. Away from the cameras, the crowd, and the buzzing of devices, Elon Musk and Nathan stepped into a quiet conference room at the back of the venue. The walls were lined with posters of Mars colonies and Tesla blueprints, but none of that mattered anymore. In this small space, it wasn't about space travel or electric cars. It was about two people, one a billionaire, the other a grieving child, searching for peace in a world that didn't offer easy answers. Nathan sat at the edge of a sleek glass table, his legs swinging slightly off the chair. Elon pulled up a seat across from him, leaned forward, and rested his elbows on the table. For a while they just sat there, neither of them saying much. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Outside the door, staffers and security waited respectfully, uncertain of what exactly was unfolding behind the closed doors. Then Nathan spoke first. He told Elon about his sister. Her name was Lily. She had been 7 when she passed away suddenly from a rare illness. One day she was coloring in the living room, and 2 weeks later she was gone. There had been no time to prepare, no time to say goodbye. And what hurt most wasn't just losing her. It was not knowing where she went. Nathan's voice didn't crack. He didn't cry. He had told the story many times before to social workers, counselors, and distant relatives who didn't quite know what to say. But Elon listened differently. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look at his watch. He gave Nathan something most adults had failed to offer: full, undivided attention. When the boy finished, Elon nodded solemnly and asked him a question. Not as a test, but with genuine curiosity. What would he want God to be like if he were real? Nathan paused, then said softly, "Kind. Someone who doesn't forget people." The simplicity of the answer hit Elon like a tidal wave. It wasn't about divine punishment or moral systems or ancient texts. It was about remembrance. About the deep human need to believe that someone out there remembers those we lose. That love doesn't just vanish. It echoes somewhere. Then, in a voice that trembled more than anyone would expect from a man who commands boardrooms and launches rockets, Elon said he understood. Because even though he had lived a life filled with success, influence, and fame, he still wrestled with the feeling that some people, and some moments, had been forgotten. He confessed something else, that there were nights he couldn't sleep, not because of deadlines or stress, but because he remembered people he'd lost. Teachers who believed in him, friends who faded away, a cousin who died young. He remembered their faces, and he wondered if they still existed in some form beyond the material. Nathan looked up at him then, not as a fan, not as someone in awe of a billionaire, but as a boy who finally felt seen. Then Elon asked him something that no one else in the boy's life had ever asked. Would he like to visit SpaceX? Nathan's eyes lit up for the first time. He nodded so hard it looked like his head might fall off. Elon smiled, the weight in the room lifting slightly. It wasn't just a tour. Elon had something more meaningful in mind, something that involved closure, wonder, and a gift no one could have predicted. Before they left the room, Elon handed Nathan a small object from his pocket. It was a silver pendant shaped like a star, one of the few personal trinkets Elon kept on him. It wasn't expensive or extravagant, but engraved on the back were the words, "The universe remembers." Nathan clutched it tightly, his small hand closing around it as if it were the most important thing in the world. And to him, it was. Because for the first time in weeks, he felt like someone powerful had given him permission to believe, not in a specific religion or creed, but in the idea that love, even after death, still has a place in the cosmos. Outside the room, staffers turned as Elon and Nathan emerged. Reporters asked for quotes. Security kept the crowds at bay, but Elon said nothing to them. He simply walked with the boy, one hand resting gently on his shoulder, as they made their way to a car waiting to take them to the SpaceX facility. Word of the interaction had already begun to spread. Clips from the stage were going viral. But what no one knew was that the story was just beginning. The real shock wasn't the question Nathan asked, it was what Elon Musk planned to do next. The next morning, the headlines were electric. News outlets across the globe were flooded with clips of the moment Elon Musk paused mid-presentation, stunned into silence by a child's innocent question. Commentators dissected his every word. Religious leaders chimed in. Philosophers debated the meaning of belief in a modern age dominated by science. But amidst all the noise, one thing remained private: Nathan's time with Elon. That morning, just as the media frenzy exploded, a modest, black SUV pulled up to the gates of SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Inside sat Nathan, still wearing the silver star around his neck, and Elon Musk, wearing the same quiet expression he'd worn the day before, reflective, a little distant, and yet unusually focused. Security waved them through, and the gates opened to reveal the sprawling campus where rockets stood like silent giants against the early morning sky. Engineers in jumpsuits zipped back and forth, and the clang of machinery echoed faintly in the distance. But this wasn't a PR tour or a scheduled photo op. No reporters had been invited. No press kits were prepared. This was a moment for two people. Elon guided Nathan through the hangars and labs, introducing him to some of the engineers, showing him prototypes of Starship components, even letting him touch a section of the rocket's exterior. But throughout the tour, Nathan kept glancing skyward. Something in him seemed to pull toward the heavens, something unresolved, something still aching. Elon noticed, and without saying much, he led the boy toward a part of the campus not typically open to visitors. The control center. It was there that Elon had already planned something far more extraordinary than Nathan, or anyone, could have anticipated. Inside the room, massive screens displayed orbital data and live feeds of rockets being prepped for a future test launch. Elon turned to one of his engineers and gave a subtle nod. The man responded with a silent thumbs up. A special capsule had been prepared, small, lightweight, and symbolic. Inside the capsule was a single digital chip, no larger than a coin. It contained a message Elon had written the night before, prompted by his conversation with Nathan. The message wasn't about product updates or technology specs. It was a letter, one written from Elon to the universe, about belief, loss, memory, and hope. But that wasn't all. Nathan's sister's name, Lily, was engraved in the microfilm, along with a short message written by Nathan himself. "I hope you're dancing among the stars." Elon turned to Nathan and told him that the next SpaceX launch, scheduled in just a few days, would carry this capsule into the sky. Not as data, not as cargo, but as a memorial. A reminder that even in the vast emptiness of space, love could leave a mark. Nathan didn't know what to say. He stared at the capsule resting on the table, then looked back at Elon, his eyes wide. He had never imagined anything like this. His sister's name, her memory, would become part of the cosmos. She would be remembered in a way that transcended grief. For Elon, this wasn't about spectacle. It was about healing. For all the things he had built in his life, none had ever felt quite like this. A simple tribute that didn't require approval from shareholders or validation from the press. Just a message, a prayer of sorts, from one boy to the stars. Later that day, Elon sat with Nathan on the roof of the facility, where they watched the sun begin to dip behind the towers and tanks. The boy asked if the rocket would go far. Elon nodded, explaining how the capsule would enter low Earth orbit before eventually being carried further by inertia and gravitational forces. It could drift for years, decades even, and maybe, just maybe, someone, something, might one day find it. Nathan didn't ask who. He didn't need to. The idea alone was enough. When it came time to leave, Elon handed him a framed printout of the digital message, preserved as a memento. It was a promise that his sister's name would live on, not in shadows or silence, but in the stars. As the car pulled away from the SpaceX compound, Nathan clutched the frame in his lap. And for the first time in weeks, his eyes weren't filled with grief, but wonder. And Elon? He stood on the rooftop long after the boy had gone, looking out toward the evening sky. In all his years of seeking answers in circuitry and science, it took a single question from a child to remind him that some truths can't be measured. They can only be felt. The launch was just days away, but the world already felt different. 3 days later, the world held its breath. SpaceX had announced a launch, one of many in their growing schedule, but this one came with an unexpected surge of attention. Whispers had spread, shared first through cryptic posts on tech forums, then picked up by media outlets and influencers. Something was different about this mission. Rumors flew. Was it a secret satellite? A prototype for something bigger? But none of the usual explanations stuck. The truth was more intimate, and it began to unfold when Elon Musk released a simple statement on social media the night before launch. It read, "This launch is for someone who asked the most important question I've ever been asked." And it carries a message that no telescope or robot could ever deliver. Sometimes, the smallest voices ask the biggest questions. He didn't say more. But those who had watched the moment at the expo, the video of Nathan asking about God, already knew. By morning, the story had gone global. Millions tuned in to SpaceX's live stream, not just for the spectacle of flame and flight, but for something deeper. This wasn't about hardware. It wasn't about Mars. It was about a boy, a question, and a billionaire who dared to answer from the heart. At the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, the Falcon 9 stood poised on the launch pad, bathed in the soft orange glow of pre-dawn. The rocket looked no different than usual, but those in the control room knew that nestled inside was a capsule no bigger than a baseball, holding the memory of a little girl named Lily, and a message crafted by a man who had once doubted everything. Until now. Nathan and Elon watched the launch side by side, not from a crowded press room, but from a private viewing deck above Mission Control. Nathan clutched the silver star around his neck, the chain resting gently over his chest. He wore a new suit, his first ever, tailored just for the event. Beside him, Elon stood silently, hands in his pockets, eyes locked on the towering rocket. Ahead, the countdown began. T-10, 9, 8. Nathan's heart pounded. He had seen launches before on YouTube, had even made model rockets at school. But this was different. This rocket was carrying his sister's name, his words, his hope. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. The engines roared to life, and a blinding column of fire erupted beneath the Falcon 9. The ground trembled. Cameras shook. The rocket rose slowly at first, then gained speed, cutting through the clouds with grace and power. The sound was deafening, but to Nathan it felt like music. As the rocket disappeared into the sky, Elon gently placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. In that moment, it wasn't just about what had been launched. It was about what had been lifted. The weight of grief. The burden of not knowing. The ache of feeling forgotten. Around the world, people watched the launch with tears in their eyes. Social media was flooded with stories. Mothers lit candles for lost children. Strangers shared names of loved ones they'd never been able to let go. The digital age had never seen anything quite like this. A collision of science, soul, and something far more eternal. Journalists scrambled for statements. Philosophers debated the meaning. Skeptics scoffed. But none of it mattered. Because what mattered wasn't the noise, but the silence that followed. the silence that made room for reflection. In the hours after launch, Elon held a quiet press conference. He didn't speak much about technical details. Instead, he read the letter that had been stored in the capsule. It was brief, poetic, and profound. It spoke of memory, connection, and the idea that love, in its purest form, might be the most powerful signal ever sent into space. He ended with a line that etched itself into history. "We've sent satellites, telescopes, and signals into the cosmos, but today, we send something more important: remembrance." Nathan sat in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. He was no longer just a boy in a hoodie. He had become a symbol of something greater. Proof that a single question could ripple through the world and touch the hearts of millions. And somewhere, far above the Earth, a capsule drifted silently through the stars, carrying with it the belief that maybe, just maybe, the universe was listening. In the days that followed, something extraordinary happened. The world didn't move on like it usually did after a viral story. This one lingered. It found its way into living rooms, classrooms, places of worship, and science labs. It became a topic not just of curiosity, but of genuine transformation. Teachers rewrote their lesson plans. Instead of focusing solely on engineering or physics, they began asking their students questions about meaning, grief, and belief. The story of Nathan and Elon made its way into textbooks before the year's end. Children across the globe saw a boy just like them ask the kind of question they thought adults didn't care about. And when they saw the most powerful man in tech listen, truly listen, it changed the way they viewed the world. Universities held panels where theologians and scientists sat side by side, not to argue but to explore. Could technology coexist with faith? Could the same mind that builds rockets also crave something eternal? The answer, they found, was yes. And Elon's example had opened a door few dared to touch before. Across religious communities, something even more unexpected unfolded. Mosques, synagogues, churches, and temples began referencing the launch in sermons. Not to claim Elon as a believer or dismiss him as a doubter, but to point out the power of the question. They spoke of how truth often begins not in answers, but in courage, the courage to ask. The Vatican issued a rare statement, praising the event as a universal gesture of remembrance and spiritual curiosity. Rabbis in Jerusalem taught about it as a modern parable. In Mecca, pilgrims whispered prayers for Lily, a girl whose name they had never known until now. Even agnostic communities applauded what had happened, not for its theology, but for its humanity. But perhaps the most moving reaction came not from institutions or scholars, but from ordinary people. Online forums turned into memorial walls. People began sharing names, siblings, parents, friends, spouses, those they had lost, those they wanted remembered. One site alone, dedicated to Messages to the Stars, received over 3 million entries in the first week. Each message was brief, emotional, and filled with longing. "I hope you're proud of me, Dad. Tell Grandma I still wear the scarf she made. If you're out there, I miss you every day." What Elon had done, what Nathan had inspired, wasn't just symbolic. It had become a movement, a shift in how people processed grief, belief, and hope. Suddenly, it wasn't so strange to think that maybe the stars weren't just empty after all. Meanwhile, Nathan returned to his foster home, but he wasn't the same boy anymore. His classmates treated him with a new kind of respect, not because he was famous, but because he had dared to ask what so many were afraid to. His teachers encouraged him to speak more. His foster parents, initially skeptical, now made time each night to ask him what he was thinking. The house, once quiet, now buzzed with ideas and conversations. He had also received an invitation from Elon's team. They wanted him to attend a summit the following month, not as a guest, but as a speaker. The theme? The future of human meaning in a technological world. And Nathan had already started preparing. At the same time, Elon Musk seemed to shift too. Behind the scenes, those closest to him noticed a difference. He still worked long hours. He still demanded excellence. But there was something quieter in his demeanor now. Less defensive, more grounded. He had always chased the stars, but now it seemed he also valued the spaces between them, the silences, the mysteries, the parts science couldn't fully explain. He began funding a new initiative at SpaceX, one that allowed individuals to send memory capsules into orbit. Not massive payloads or marketing gimmicks, but tiny pieces of people's lives. Letters, photos, names. A way for humanity to inscribe its stories into the void, not out of pride, but out of remembrance. When asked during an interview why he was funding such a project, Elon simply said, "Because someone once reminded me that not everything valuable can be measured, and I don't want us to forget that." And then he added something that hadn't been publicly known. A second capsule had been sent up on that same flight, the one that carried Lily's name. This one contained Nathan's original question, engraved in polished titanium. "Do you believe in God?" It wasn't meant to be answered. It was meant to endure. The world had seen many rocket launches before. It had celebrated speed, altitude, precision. But this one? This one reminded everyone that even the most advanced technology must eventually confront the most ancient longing. To be remembered, to be loved, to believe, and somewhere above, drifting in eternal silence, those questions still moved among the stars. Months passed, but the story refused to fade. What began as a spontaneous moment between a grieving boy and a world-famous entrepreneur had grown into a global touchstone, a rare example of modern life slowing down to reflect on something deeper than headlines or hashtags. The story of Nathan, Elon Musk, and the capsule that carried a message of love and faith into space had etched itself into the cultural consciousness. For Elon, the shift became permanent. He remained a titan of industry, still immersed in the challenges of interplanetary travel and energy sustainability. But behind the brilliance and pressure of his daily life, something had softened. He began carving out time for reflection. Quiet walks, longer conversations with his sons, books on spirituality and human philosophy that once collected dust on his shelves. He wasn't a preacher. He didn't claim divine visions or newfound religion. But he had opened a window in his mind he no longer felt the need to close. In interviews, his tone changed. He no longer danced around questions about faith or existence. He answered them with a sincerity that made headlines every time. He admitted he still didn't know if God existed, but he now believed it was okay not to know. And more importantly, he believed in something bigger than algorithms and equations. He believed in memory, in kindness, in what he called the quiet intelligence of the soul. Nathan, meanwhile, became more than just a symbol. He blossomed. His story inspired a scholarship fund in his name, focused on helping children who had lost siblings or parents pursue careers in science and philosophy. He was invited to speak on stages around the world, not for his technical knowledge, but for his heart. And wherever he went, he carried that small silver star around his neck, the same one Elon had given him, now slightly worn from touch, but gleaming nonetheless. His speeches weren't grand. They didn't rely on big words or dramatic flair. He would simply tell the story, how he lost his sister, how he asked a question, and how the world listened. And at the end of every talk, he'd point upward and say, "Somewhere out there, my sister is remembered." And maybe that's what belief is all about. Not knowing for sure, but choosing to hope anyway. He was no longer just a boy. He had become a kind of light. And the capsule? It still drifted in orbit, untouched, unseen by the naked eye, but tracked by thousands of amateur astronomers and stargazers. People watched it like a comet of memory, a satellite of human feeling. Scientists marveled at how something so small could carry such weight. The capsule's orbit would last decades, perhaps longer. And even when it eventually burned up upon re-entry, or was lost to the void beyond, its story would remain etched into human history. Art exhibitions emerged, displaying replica capsules with engraved names and messages. Poets wrote verses inspired by the moment. Musicians composed symphonies that used NASA launch audio as part of their arrangements. One orchestral piece, titled Lily's Orbit, sold out every performance. But beyond the fame, beyond the spectacle, the legacy lived in quieter places. In the bedtime prayers of children who'd lost loved ones, in the whispered questions of adults who now dared to believe, even just a little, that there might be more. And Elon? Years later, when asked in an interview what he thought his most meaningful invention was, he didn't mention Tesla or SpaceX. He didn't talk about Mars or AI. Instead, he paused, smiled faintly, and said, "The message capsule." The interviewer raised an eyebrow. "Why that?" Elon looked off, as if remembering the weight of that moment on stage, the small boy beside him, the silence that followed. "Because for the first time, we didn't just send something into space," he said. "We sent something from the soul." And, in a small town where Nathan had eventually settled with a new, loving family, a telescope pointed to the stars every night. He still looked up, still whispered her name, and still wore that silver star. Because no matter how far technology advanced, or how many rockets lit the sky, one truth remained. The most powerful thing we can launch into the universe is love, and sometimes all it takes to ignite that launch is a question.